Hey, what's up guys? Pat here, and this time we're back with the World Martial Arts Tournament blue cards for draft. Like last time with the red cards, we are going to go over how I feel all of the cards in the blue element stack up in the format for drafting. Draft Box 3 again is a couple weeks out, so I want to give you guys my analysis and my take on what I think are the best cards so that you guys can win those Draft Box 3 tournaments at your local and bring in some extra prize packs and things like that, store credit, help you guys out. Obviously, this is the second of part 4. You guys can go back and watch the red cards if you want. And when we're done here, we're going to obviously tail back to Colossal Warfare, since those will be the two sets you will see in the draft box. Also important to note, this weekend is the Broly movie in theaters, where you can get the black promo Broly leader. It's I believe Saturday and Monday at 7 p.m. You can check fathomevents.com to try to find the tickets for the movie if you're trying to pick up that card and go with some friends and have a good time. I know I'll be going this weekend. Hopefully you guys are doing the same. But yeah, with that out of the way, let's get back into the video and talk about the grading scale for these of you guys who are unfamiliar with. So we rate cards on a scale of 0 to 10. 10 are the best. They're basically unstoppable cards that you can't beat. 9s are bombs that are still beatable, but for the most part they seal up the game. 8s are good super rares or rares, or top tier uncommons or commons. These are amazing cards that should be prioritized over everything else except game winning cards. 7s are what you're looking for most of the time. These are the good playables, the ones you want your deck to be made up of. 6s are basically lower end cards that are still playable and you'd be happy to have in your deck. 5s are solid cards that may get cut if your deck is just loaded with really good cards. 4 are filler cards that you most likely won't use. They get cut maybe about half the time. 3s are filler cards that you'll use that sometimes barely make it. These are like the lower end cards that they're the scraps, the loose ends. 2 are filler cards that are most likely never going to see play unless you're absolutely desperate to make a 40 card deck. 1s are awful cards, sideboard at best, and a 0 is under no circumstances should you ever play this card. So first up is Oob, Unknowing Power. On the front side, he's the standard attacks leader, draws 4 less life, untaps 2. Backside, when he attacks, obviously draws a card. And then he has Activate Main, choose 1 card from your life and add it to your hand. Choose 1 of your opponent's battle cards and return it to their owner's hand. Then this card gains 5,000 for the turn. So you could do a lot worse than Oob. And if he's in your first pack and he's the leader that you have to end up taking, that's pretty good. This is most likely going to be drafted with Colossal Warfare. So cards like Flute are still going to be in your draft pool. He is blue, so that in itself is really good. So he's got the support cards. He has a pretty solid extra card as well in this set that you'd be happy to have. So just all around really good. His removal is a little risky, but it's still removal when you need it in a pinch, and removal does win games in draft and in a sealed. So he's just a really solid pick. You could do a lot worse than him. I think he's the second best leader you can open in World Martial Arts Tournament. The first probably being Jackie Chun. But yeah, Oob, really solid card. He gets a 7. You'd be happy to play this. He's not the best leader you can play in the format, but he's definitely a competitive choice. So next up is Test of Strength Son Goku. 3-drop 15k double strike is really, really good. He has auto when you play this card. If your leader's World Tournament, you can choose 1 Test of Strength Oob from your hand and play. If you do, he gets plus 5k. That's a really powerful effect. Unfortunately, he and Oob are both at the rare level, which means the consistency of pulling off the combo in draft is very low, unless later on in the pack somebody ends up passing you the other piece, and even then you have to draw both pieces for it to work out. So you basically have to grade Goku on the as if he were just a 3-cost 15k double strike with upside, and that's pretty good, honestly. You'd obviously like to have a 20k double strike if you can help it, but there are a lot worse things you could be playing at 3 than a 15k double strike. 15k crit is probably better, but this is the closest thing I think you can get, and that's why Goku is going to end up getting a 7. So next up, top of his game, Son Gohan. There's no beating around the bush here. Just like all the other super combos, it's a 7 out of 10. The reason why this is not an 8 or 9 or 10 is this card effectively filters through your deck, and unlike constructed formats where you're just drawing into foreseeing hits or scrambling assault go-10s, you're just drawing into good quality bombs. That's not guaranteed and limited, so you are basically investing a pick in a card that thins your deck, and if your deck doesn't already have those 8s, 9s, and 10s in your deck, then this card's just going to end up drawing you a bunch of 4, 5s, and 6s. So that's why it's not the highest priority to take a super combo. You'd be happy to have it, but it's not going to ever be your first pick. So moving on, we have Scuffle Time Sun Goten. 2-drop 10k doesn't thrill me. The only times I ever want to play a 2-drop 10k are if it has some bit of utility, or it's got removal, or something like it's Yajirobe where it's a revenge blocker, or it draws me a card, which is the case here with Scuffle Time Sun Goten. So he has Activate Main. You can choose one card from your life and add it to your hand. You can still do that regardless of whether or not you have Scuffle Time Mr. Boo. I don't feel like Mr. Boo is that great of a card, which we'll talk about him in a little bit. But even so, you get to choose one of your energies, switch it to active mode. He gets 10k, so this card effectively becomes a 10k, and then then gets to attack again as a 20k. That's pretty solid, but you do have to play Mr. Boo, and do actually have to have multiple copies of Mr. Boo to make it worth it. So yeah, definitely a solid card. That's why I'm going to give him a 6, just because his worst case scenario is he's a Self-Awakener that draws me a card. Really good on 2. Loses a lot of value the longer the game goes on, so not exactly something I want to be seeing all the time. A lot of the 7s and 8s you see in this video, you'd be happy to have them pretty much at any time. So next up we have Pan, Proudest Daughter. Super rares in this set are kind of weak, honestly, outside of the red element in terms of limited. She's just a 4-drop 15k dual attack. If your leader card's blue World Tournament and you have Hercule, Proudest Grandpa in play in your battle area, she gets 10k and double strike. That's awesome. The thing is, they're both super rares. Realistically, you will never, ever, ever open both of them. If you somehow live the dream, by all means, play both cards. But for the most part, Pan, 95% of the time she is opened in draft. She is just a 4-drop 15k dual attack. And that's basically what we have to take her as, and that's what we have to evaluate her as, which is basically a 5. You could do a lot worse on 4 than Pan for the a 15k dual attack, but this card isn't going to win you games like Deborah. It's not removal, and it's certainly not even as good as a 20k double strike, which is what most of the 4-drops are across limited. They're just 4-drop 20k double strikes. Most of them don't even have effects in limited. So yeah, not what I really want when I see a 4-drop. It's playable, not great. What is great though is Awakening Talent Pan, both in constructed and limited. 1-drop 5k. When it attacks, you can take a card from your life. If you do, it gains 10k power for the turn. Obviously, it's not going to have double its strike like Kaba does, or critical like Trunks or Kid Gohan have. But this card is still a repeatable value engine because it bounces back to your turn at the end of every turn, or back to your hand at the end of every turn. Sorry. So this is basically one cost free attack that can hit the leader even on both sides and draws you a card. It's relevant at pretty much every stage of the game as a way to finish off your opponent when they're at 1 life, as well, and get you the extra gas to get there. Helps you self-awaken in the mid game, and then obviously it's a pretty solid beater in the early game. That's why you give it an 8. I think it's one of the better rares you can be taking, especially in blue for this set. So if you open Pan, she's one of the better picks, like I said, you can take first in the pack overall. Next up is Begrudging Respect Vegeta. 20k barrier is pretty good. When you play this card, if your leader is World Tournament, you have Begrudging Respect Piccolo. Your opponent chooses 2 cards from the hand and places them on top of their deck in any order. That's really, really strong. But again, it's an uncommon, so you're most likely only ever going to see 1 copy of Vegeta, maybe 2 in a draft. Same thing goes with Piccolo. He's also an uncommon, so you're going to see 1, maybe 2. So we kind of have to really evaluate Vegeta as a 20k barrier, which is pretty good. It is a playable 4-drop, not as good as probably a 20k double strike, but I would argue a 20k barrier is a lot more useful to you than say a 15k dual attack like Pan is. So I would be happy to take Vegeta as a mid pick towards the middle of the pack. I don't think I would take him early on in the pack, but he is still a really good card. I would give him a 7. Definitely playable. Definitely would be happy to see him in my final deck. Next up we have Awkward Situation Trunks, which this is an awkward situation. He's a 2-drop 15k vanilla for the most part, but because he's at the common level and the card that he pairs with is also common, it's actually somewhat likely that you'll get him off. And when you do actually get the, what I believe his name is Otokosuki, when you get him out, or when you have both of them in your hand, you're paying 2 costs to get 2 15Ks on 2. That's really, really strong in limited. That's almost can take over the game right then and there. So we have to really like evaluate Trunks, on this scale of how good is he without Otokosuki, however you say it, and with the card. So that's why he gets the split rating of 6 and 8. A 2-drop 15k vanilla is definitely a solid card, definitely playable in our deck for sure. But if you have 2 or 3 copies of this Trunks and 2 or 3 copies of the other card, this card quickly becomes an 8 because it can take over the game. And it can basically give you a commanding lead early on in the game, and that sets you up for a big 4 or 5 cost play, like say one of your 25k double strikes, or some of your larger cards you may have drafted from Colossal Warfare, and pretty much close out the game. He just puts you in a really, really good spot. I would definitely take one Trunks for sure in the middle to later part of my pack and be pretty content with it. But as multiple are open and you start to see more, each copy makes the card gain in value for sure. So if you have 3 of these, this card is just the jam. One copy, like I said, it's probably a 6, and it all depends on whether or not you can get the other card, because the other card that goes with the combo is pretty terrible unless you actually have the Trunks. Next up is the Begrudging Respect Piccolo that goes with the Vegeta we talked about. And just like we said with Goten and with Gohan in the previous video, 2-drop 10k is not where I want to be. It's got barrier, that's fine. So maybe you get the payoff with Vegeta. But, for the most part, this card doesn't really do anything unless you have the Vegeta. He's got barrier. He gets blocker if you have Vegeta, which is like, okay, fine. So he doesn't really do anything if we have the payoff. And then his other effect is when you play him, you get to bin and get to blow up one of your opponent's energy. If you've charged one and they still have more than you. SS3 is not in this format, so that's not going to happen unless you somehow are drafting this really awkward format where you're opening set 3 along with this as your other thing. But like I said, for the most part, people are opening this as part of draft box 3, so the effect is largely irrelevant most of the time, and he's just a 2-drop 10k barrier. That's why he gets a 4. I probably wouldn't play him unless I somehow had a critical mass of Vegetas. You somehow got lucky and saw like 2 or 3 of them in your packs, and you ended up drafting all of them. Again, they're at the uncommon level, so uncommons usually work out to be 1 to 2 copies per box, and you're getting half a box in draft, in the draft box 3. So yeah, again, I don't see myself really jamming this unless I have a ton of Vegetas. Next up is Mr. Boo. This is the card that goes with the Goten. 1-drop 5k barrier is basically irrelevant. It doesn't do anything. It has activate, place this card on the bottom of its owner's deck. If you have Goten in your battle area, choose up to one of your opponent's battle cards and return it to its owner's hand. So, if you have Goten and you have Boo, you get to basically bounce one of your opponent's guys, and the Goten will get to attack twice. But if you don't have a critical mass of both Boos and Gotens, this card does nothing most of the time. You absolutely have to have the Goten for it to really work out. That's why it gets the 4. I like Piccolo. If you hit a critical mass of Gotens, if you somehow happen into say 2 or 3 Gotens, then 1 or 2 Scuffle Boos is pretty good. You'll have a pretty solid early game in that respect. But if you just don't have the cards, if you just don't have multiple copies of things, it's not really worth your time. I prefer to draft, good standalone cards that make a consistent deck rather than fill my deck with a lot of awkward combos or combos that require 2 pieces and I have to have both of them. Consistency is not your friend in draft. You don't have it like you do in constructive formats. You're not going to have 4 copies of every card. You're going to have 1 and 2 copies of a lot of cards all the time. So when a card like Boo comes around and doesn't do anything for 1 cost, I really just don't want to play it. Speaking of cards I really don't want to play, Hercule Proudest Grandpa, another super rare. 3-drop 10k barrier. That's awful. When you play it, when your Pan Proudest Daughter is played, you draw 2 cards, and at the end of your turn, choose one of your energies, switch it to active mode. So you basically have to have Pan, the super rare, which you're not going to get 2 super rares. It's just not going to happen. It's really, really, really unlikely. So yeah, 2 for Hercule. He's pretty bad. Just forget about him. Next up, Test of Strength Oob. This card, really good. 3-drop, 15k critical. We already discussed it in the last video. It alone is great and can win games. People need to draw cards from their life to stabilize and be consistent in this format unless they have a really good deck to begin with. So 3 drop 15k critical already alone would net this card a 7. The thing is, if you somehow manage to draft the rare Test of Strength Son Goku, you get to place 2 of your opponent's battle cards at 20k or less and place on the bottom of their owner's decks. That is a blowout. Like, that is pretty much game ending. But again, like we said with Goku and other cards, it's not consistent that you'll get both of them. But that said, 3 drop critical, that alone gets you a 7. I'm going to give Oob an 8 because with that slight chance that you can actually get the Goku as well in your draft pod, the Oob just puts it over the top. Like, he's closer to an 8 than a 7 already to begin with. So being able to blow up 2 things, really, really strong, really, really broken. Next up, we have Wild Tiger, the Imposing. He is a 2 drop 15k blocker. I really like Wild Tiger. He is a beater in the early game, and he has a way to stop your opponent from killing you in the late game. There's nothing else more to say than that. He's just relevant at every stage of the game. Excellent top deck. He's a 7 for sure. You will always, always be happy to have this card in your deck because, like I said, 2 drop 15Ks are the name of the game in this, and in the late turns, he will prevent you from dying. So you'll be pretty happy about that. And since his stats are pretty bulky to begin with, he might actually be able to block 2 attacks because you might be able to block this. They might not combo. You might combo a 5k just to save the Wild Tiger, untap on the end of your next turn, and you get to keep him again. So really, really strong card at every stage, like I said. Next up, we have Otokosuki, which is the other half of the Trunks combo. He's a 4 drop 15k with no effect. That is unplayably bad. That said, if you happen to have a critical mass of this card and Trunks, it's kind of a blowout to be able to just drop Trunks and then this guy on 2. Yeah, just it's not much to say. If you don't have the Trunks, he's a 1. You'll never really use him. He might honestly even be a 0. You'll just never use him unless you have a critical mass of Trunkses. If you do have Trunkses, he's basically a 7. That's largely because he's a worse top deck than Trunks. That's why he doesn't get the 8. And then finally, we have shocking latent ability, Oob. It's Unbreakable Son Goku for Oob. If you're playing Oob, the card's really good. But like we said with super combos, if you're not filling your deck with quality, it's not really that good. There's also the fact that you actually have to have opened Oob, so that's why it's going to get a 6. It's not as good as a super combo. Sure, you can use it earlier, but it still does cost you 1 energy, and you still do have to have a specific leader. It's not exactly the highest pick, but if you're confident that Oob will be open somewhere in the at the table, like you're on pack 1 and you see like a critical mass of these, you see 1 or 2, you can pick these up if you're already in blue and just hope for the chance that you get the Oob, and it'll make your deck a lot better for it. Again, just like we said with the super combos, you want to pick these up in the middle of the pack usually. You don't want to be trying to be taking these as your first pick if you can help it. Unless you're already deep into Oob and you already have a very developed strategy, like a pack 3 pick 1, this could be pretty great for you. Alright guys, so that's the blue cards. Again, go out and see the Broly movie this weekend, get your promos, enjoy it. I'll be back on Monday to do this again, probably with the green cards. So if you guys have any other questions or comments, be sure to let me know down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.